Hi, April. Okay, Tyler, are you ready? It's 12:15.
All right, let's go.
Okay, so let me see if there's my virtual bell to start our first virtual meeting of Waco Rotary. I'm pleased to be your president for this year, and I know the board is pleased to join me in welcoming everybody and thanking you for your patience in joining us for this virtual experience. We're going to try to make it as close to a Rotary meeting, a regular meeting as we can. So we want to go through sort of our routine business and things that we normally do. So you at least are focusing in the same way you do when we have a meeting, even though we are not able to have the same kind of fellowship together. So we actually are going to start with the National Star Spangled Banner. We have a recording of that for you, and I'm going to say the Pledge of Allegiance, just so we can all get in that same frame of mind of thinking about our country and what we are as Rotarians to our country. So we're going to have 2 slides with the national anthem, and I'll just ask you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance or follow along. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all for joining us for that. And Tyler is now going to actually do a small tutorial. We think that many people have seen a lot of Zoom, but there may be some people who have not participated yet, and they don't know necessarily how to ask questions or utilize the software. So Tyler's going to briefly go through that, and then we're going to come back after that.
All right, welcome Rotarians. Thank you all for your patience as we work through this first meeting and get all the kinks worked out. Wanted to kind of give you some little pointers here as we go so you can make the most of this meeting and get the best experience as possible. First, if you will, make sure that your microphone is muted. You should not have the option to unmute, but just to make sure when you join the meeting, you can click on the mute button and it will keep you muted throughout the meeting. If you're having trouble with your hearing, you can click on the little arrow next to the mute button and a box will pop up and you can choose what speakers you'd like to use. You can click on the participants and a new window will open up to the right. When we're not in the shared screen mode, you will see this window. You can see all the participants. You can chat in this window, but more importantly, you can see all the participants and click on them and see little things about them. You can click on the chat button and that will open up in the same window as the participants. And when you do that, you can click on each participant and chat with them individually. or you can chat with the whole group in that window. Next is the reaction option. You can click on this and it will give you a thumbs up or a clap option. When you do that, it'll show up in your screen, kind of like Captain Logue is doing right now. It shows up on their screen that you're either clapping or thumbs up. Give everybody kind of a way of letting everybody know what you're thinking. If you're having trouble viewing, or if you want to change your view, you can click on the gallery view up top, and that'll change from just seeing one person, whoever's speaking, to seeing the whole group. And hopefully, next meeting will be live on Facebook, and I will also be taking comments. So if you want to email Tyler@palshomehealth.com or go to the chat function in Zoom. Back to that, you can see the chat function over here. You can send your questions for the presenters through chat, or you can email them to me while the meeting is going, and we'll present those to the presenters, or give those to the presenters and during the Q&A session at the very end. All right, back to you, Ashley.
Okay, thanks, Tyler. So we are going to try to make this a great experience. So as you're participating today, we would ask that you make note of things that you think we could do to improve this experience. We do want to have feedback from people, and so we are very welcome to that. But we are really working hard to try to provide you with an engaging experience that's not too long of a meeting and does provide you some value. So please bear with us and give us comments, and we will try to do a great job for you until we can meet live. I wanted to give you an update before we hear from our great speakers today that we have lined up. The board of directors has actually came together in a strategic planning retreat in June, and we did a couple of things. We looked at previous plans that had been developed by other boards. We looked at previous comments and surveys and group discussions from the membership about things that they think we need for our club in the future. And they took that information and processed it, and they determined the things that we've accomplished. We, under the leadership of several presidents before me, we've accomplished a lot of goals to help modernize the club and move it into the future. And they set the priorities for what they think our next steps are. And especially during this time of COVID where we're not able to meet, what are the things that we need to do? So we do have some goals that I'm going to briefly go through with you, just so you know what the board is working on to try to maximize your membership experience this year. And so Tyler's going to start going through those slides. Our first goal is that we are going to host full live membership meetings when permitted and feasible. So the board has a way, we've developed a little protocol within the program committee about how we're going to make decisions about live meetings in the future. So we'll have schedules, and then we'll call those whenever we can, in terms of it's going to be a live meeting because it looks like that's the best thing for us to do. We will have to have limitations most likely until we're on the other side of COVID about reservations for meetings. We will probably have to have reservations because we're going to have limited capacity most likely when we can meet live. We'll meet virtually for a while, but we are going to have to do that in the future. And when we can't meet live, we are going to develop a high quality virtual experience. And we're going to do this not just for the COVID period, but we think that a modern club, a club that's looking at future generations as members, needs to have an online experience that's available to them in addition to having a live meeting experience, so that that's available for makeups, and it's also available for people who, for whatever reason, are not able to join us live. So there will be two options: to come live and then also to participate virtually from this time forward. And Tyler has done a great deal of work getting us to the place where we can have this virtual meeting. It takes a lot of work to do this. So we're going to be working hard to make sure that the virtual experience is high quality this year. Next slide, Tyler. We are going to, this is the most important thing, we think, is that even though it's tough on us when we can't have fellowship and meet live, it's tougher on the young people of our community and of our county. Their experience of being seniors in high school or freshmen in college or dealing with college experiences is really, this is a tough time for them. And so the things that we do, the Youth Service Fund, our signature initiatives, our Youth Service Scholarship Awards and ceremonies, even the Student Guest Program, the Scholarship Program, Challenge, and Literacy, We want Rotarians to focus more on what we can do to continue our services as normal as possible and make the senior year and college experience the most normal as possible we can for the youth of Central Texas. Because even though we can't meet as a club, they still need the kind of services that we provide, the things that we have done for them. So we encourage you to stay focused on them as well. Fourth, we want to support, and I think we've got a different screen there, but I'll just keep going through the goals and you can just follow along with me. We want to support and promote engagement in the Rotary Foundation and the Paul Harris Fellows Program. So as everyone is aware, we do recognize and encourage gifts to the Rotary Foundation. It's what funds the work of a lot of Rotary things in the world. It helped to fund our African Well Project. It helps to fund the global scholarships that we've had several people from Waco take advantage of. And so we're going to continue to support the Rotary Foundation and recognize those of you who give $1,000 to it over time and are recognized as Paul Harris Fellows. So we will continue that as well. Fifth, we are going to evaluate the industry. This is probably the biggest project we have for this year, and that's we're going to evaluate our industry in the community and look at our classification system. So the classification system, as many of you are aware, we are all members of a certain classification, and the classification system that we have is intended to provide a breadth of people in the club. We want to tap on all of the industries and professions that are in our community so we have a robust club. Part of that is so that we can get to know the businesses of different people, and part of it is so that we have a vibrant membership that can provide service to the community. So we're going to continue with that as well. We are going to develop opportunities for Rotarians to engage with one another in smaller groups and virtually to serve the club and the community. So even when we cannot come together as a full membership, we do want to provide the opportunity for smaller groups to come together in whatever way is feasible and do things. So as we mentioned, we have those things that we want to do this year. It's going to take some people working in committees to do some of those things. And so we invite you, when you can't come and be in the big club membership meetings on Monday, maybe to consider serving on one of those committees. And thanks you to those of you who responded to the survey. If you're interested in helping or maybe interested in helping, we'll send out another reminder about the survey and ask you to complete that as well after this meeting today. And then the last goal we're going to have is we're going to highlight the businesses of Rotarians and try to support networking. So when we can't have a live meeting experience to support networking, we think we want to do things that help us understand what the businesses are that Rotarians work in and how we can learn more about them. I know that from being a member of Rotary, I do talk to a lot of people, but I'm not fully aware of what everyone's business is and what it does. I don't know what its challenges are during the COVID period, and maybe I want to be a customer of that business, or maybe the Rotary Club needs to draw on that business to do things for the club or in the community. So we want to do things this year that actually highlight the businesses that Rotarians are involved in to support that networking function when we can't do those one-on-one personal discussions that we do during our membership meetings. So those will be the goals for the year that the board is going to work on, and we encourage you to get engaged in the work of committees to help us accomplish those goals as you are interested. And we will report back on the progress of those when they're accomplished and throughout the year. So the next portion of our program is really going to be just our speakers. We did arrange for 2 speakers today to present on a topic that we think is very timely. And we're going to hear about the PPP program that continues to evolve and affect many of us. And we're doing a little bit different today. We're going to talk about, we're going to introduce the speakers, and then we will also have, actually mention the business of these speakers, because that's part of our trying to introduce the different businesses, wanting to do some networking, because we have Rotarians who work in both of these businesses, and they helped to arrange these speakers today. And so we just wanted to recognize those businesses for allowing their employees to be members of Rotary as well. Our first speaker is going to be Jennifer Manning. We're pleased that Jennifer's joining us. You can see she's a CPA and partner with Patillo Brown Hill, and she's been with the firm since 1994. And you can see her experience there is in accounting and tax preparation, which includes tax planning and business consulting services to professional service organizations and owners of closely held and family businesses. So we really appreciate Jennifer joining us today. And on the next slide is about Patella Brown Hill. And you can see just some information about that firm that we want to recognize for providing the speaker and also for allowing for its members to be members of Rotaries. Established in 1923, so almost 100 years old, Patella Brown Hill, and you can see they have a wide service area that they serve. The next slide, please, for our other speaker, which is Michael Brown. And we'll just wait for that to come up. Michael Brown joined JRVT after graduating from Baylor. He serves as a shareholder and leads the forensic and valuation services practice area. You can see that he looks at all kinds of variety of things: acquisition and sales, income, gift, estate tax, litigation, and he performs economic damage analysis, asset tracing, and other consulting and expert services in litigation. In 2013, Texas Society of CPAs named Michael Young CPA of the Year in Texas for his significant contributions to the accounting profession. So we are pleased to have Michael here, and we have another slide about JRVT, his firm, established in 1913, so over 100 years old. We have two very established accounting firms that are providing our speakers today, and you can see what they do there at JRVT and their mission. So thanks to both of our speakers for joining us today. They had a pretty tough week last week, and we know that they took some time out of their extremely taxing schedules to present for the Rotarians today. So thank you both, and thanks to both of your firms for providing speakers and providing dues for Rotarians. And I will turn it over to Jennifer, who is going to provide our first presentation. And then Jennifer, once you're done, you can just pass it on to Michael. And thank you. And you're muted right now, so.
Give me just a second, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I muted the wrong person. Two seconds, I'm so sorry. All right, here we go. There we go, Jennifer. Sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you. So thank you guys so much for having Michael and me today. We so appreciate it. And we're very honored to be included on your first virtual meeting. So we'll do our best to keep this concise and informational and give you a chance to ask some questions. We're really going to keep it pretty general and high level today, and hopefully arm you with some good information to go back, as many of you maybe already received a PPP loan, or you've been in the process of helping people get a PPP loan, you know, getting through the covered period and leading towards the forgiveness end of things. Hopefully we'll give you some good information to take back and do a little digging on, or kind of just arm yourself with what's to come. So first though, I just want to say thank you guys so much to the Rotarians for what they do in our community. And obviously to so many of you that are business leaders that do so much just in your businesses and in the community. I recognize a lot of faces, and I know how much time you put into our community. So thank you so much for that. And even further, I want to say hats off to our local lenders. I know I saw a few leaders in our banking and financial institutions community, and just wanted to say thanks so much for all that you guys did during the PPP application time period. It was hectic, to say the least, and we were all learning and sharing as we went, and you guys helped a ton of businesses here in town. And you know, Michael and I, as we're working with our clients, see what an impact, a positive impact, to say the least, it has been on our businesses. So thank you guys so much for that. We'll have time for question and answer, I think, towards the end, but feel free to hit the chat or give us a reaction. So we know, and we're happy to call on you and provide further information. And so we'll just kind of start from there. So many of you, I'm sure, have kept up with PPP in your daily lives, and probably you had to be living under a rock if you haven't heard about the PPP yet. We've got from, you know, what channel you're looking at, what you're reading, what you're watching online. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has differing information, and hopefully we can put a little more emphasis on some things that we think will be helpful to you guys going forward. So first of all, just to give you a little background, and I think it's kind of important. Number one, we're accountants, so you can just kind of put us in that little nerd box and know that we like statistics. And so I'll share a few with you that I think are pretty interesting for PPP, and kind of provide a little bit of context for what I'm going to talk about, and then also what Michael's going to talk about in the forgiveness realm. So there have basically been 3 acts that the president has signed over the last 3 to 4 months. So we first had the CARES Act, which was on March 27th, and that provided emergency assistance and healthcare response for individuals, families, and businesses affected by the pandemic. Then in April, we had the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act. And then in June, we had the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act. So we had all of these acts coming through that laid a good guideline for us to work through PPP. But as we went, more specific information was coming out, and the banks and lenders and borrowers were all kind of working to figure out the best way to implement PPP in their businesses. And so it's been quite a challenge. Obviously, you may know that PPP loans are 100% backed by the SBA. And obviously the biggest benefit is that the full principal amount may qualify for loan forgiveness. So it's a huge way to really supplement businesses during a time that we never could have imagined if we were talking about this last year or even early this year. So as of July 10th, which is the most recent information that is available through SBA, they have actually given out 4.9 million loans, just the number of loans, 4.9 million loans across the nation, which represents about $517 billion. And just to kind of give you a little context, which, who are we actually reaching with the PPP program? Because, there was quite a bit of information about people getting PPP loans that maybe should not have, or that had other ways of financing their business through the pandemic period. And so maybe you heard of the different NBA teams or national franchises. But to let you know, the overall average loan size is actually $105,000. And 67% of the loans are less than $50,000. So we're reaching small businesses, which is really what it was intended for. Of the 4.9 million loans that SBA has given out, 4.2 million of the loans were under $150,000, but that only represents $142 billion of their total $517 billion. And I'm telling you this to get to a point a little bit later when we talk about forgiveness, and Michael kicks that off. But all that to be said, so many of the businesses that have participated in PPP are the small businesses that really don't have other choices with respect to capital that they can raise quickly to keep their employees. And that's really what this was all about. To kind of narrow it down a little bit more, we're talking nationwide, but now if you just look at Texas, we've received 391,000 loans, which is $40.7 billion. And if you narrow it down even further to Waco, which this is a little more general, kind of going by just averages that we're seeing, just Waco, not McLennan County, but just Waco, we're estimating a little over $250,000 in PPP funding. So we've got a lot of businesses that have taken advantage and have really seen this as a key component of working through the pandemic. You may not know, though, some of you, if you haven't gotten a PPP loan yet and you think that you may qualify, you actually still have until August 8th to obtain the loan. If you haven't talked to your lender yet, you probably should, and worked through what that may look like at this point. And there are actually online resources that you can use now. I would caution you to be very careful about that and make sure you're with a reputable online provider. However, that is an option that's out there if you're having trouble finding someone that will do the PPP loan at this point. So the big question, okay, this is all great, it's a PPP loan, so am I eligible? Can I even get a PPP loan? Well, if you have 500 or fewer employees whose principal place of residence is in the US, or you're a small business as defined by SBA, which they actually have a really nifty tool on the SBA website where you can check that, you can qualify. And in fact, 501c3 organizations qualify as well. And it can also apply to self-employed individuals and independent contractors. So definitely take a look and see if you may qualify. And you also have to have been in operation on February 15th, 2020 and had employees or paid independent contractors. So that's a big kind of defining date within the PPP program. So make sure that you have that taken care of. And there are some additional stipulations with respect to seasonal businesses, or if there was a change in ownership. There are a lot of specifics, but I just want to kind of give you good overall information so that you can kind of take it back and do additional research if you know that you may be eligible, or you think you might be. So when people were getting ready to do the PPP application, or when you're looking at it, it's really at first glance just kind of a simple little 2-page application. And the first page is basically, you have to come up with your average monthly payroll, multiply it by 2.5, telling your number of employees, and you can basically complete the application with some initials and check marks. It doesn't look too daunting. And it really isn't, but there's some additional information kind of required behind the scenes. And I would definitely encourage you to reach out to your lender that you're working with, because they all kind of created their own special template that they like to use. And so they're all just a little bit different, but in general, they require payroll reports from 2019. So we're talking about your W-2s and W-3, your 941s, quarterly reports, annual reports, just really good documentation of how you came up with the maximum amount of loan that you're requesting on the application. So pretty simple process, but there are some stipulations. And when you're looking at it, the big things to be looking at are your employees and how much you're paying them. And we're talking about the gross. So not the net, not after payroll taxes or deferrals or health insurance contributions, any of that. We're talking about your gross wages. And then you can also add to that your health insurance premiums that you pay on their behalf, your retirement contributions that you pay for them. And so you're looking at just overall payroll costs. And the SBA has done a pretty good job. Once we got kind of through different guidance that's been coming out, they've done a pretty good job of defining that. So it's good to kind of arm yourself with that information before you start the application process. One of the questions that did require some clarification on the very front end, it looked like the SBA was going to allow you to include in this factor contract labor. And so that was a little bit of a point of contention at the very beginning. They did come back and clarify that no, that is not included in your average monthly payroll cost, because in theory, those people that you're paying contract labor to, they could be applying for the PPP loan themselves. So you don't want to duplicate that loan amount. If you're looking at including your health insurance and your retirement contributions in your application, you would want to make sure that you have documentation for that as well. And so a lot of times that just meant invoices from your insurance provider or a remittance statement that you have for your retirement plan administrator. So just any way that you can kind of give a little third-party qualification to the deduction or the loan amount that you're asking for. All right. Any questions about that so far? You can raise your hand or virtually raise your hand if you do. All right. So let's go under the concept. Actually, I do want to mention one other thing. One of the certifications that is required on the loan document is that given the economic uncertainty of the pandemic, that is what makes the loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of you as the applicant. So that's probably the most specific certification that came under question and led people to really kind of ponder, you know, can you really certify to that fact? And so there was a lot of question and answer about that, a lot of uncertainty. And you basically have to, you know, assess your current economic need under the Act and the PPP regulations that are in effect at the time you're making your loan application. And unfortunately, the SBA didn't say, here's a list of 10 points. If you get 6 out of 10, then yes, you can certify. Or if you have 4 or less, you can't certify. It wasn't that specific. You actually have to do a little bit of thought on your end. But then later they came out and said, for those that request a loan, request and receive a loan of $2 million or less, you are seen as being in good faith, certifying that you need the funds, and the SBA is not going to require any additional documentation for that. And so at this point, if your loan amount is more than $2 million, you can expect that is going to require a little more documentation, and you'll have more questions from the SBA, we expect. Obviously, the SBA is quite overwhelmed, and depending on how the forgiveness process goes, it could be even more overwhelmed. So we'll see kind of how that process plays out. It will be over the next years. It's going to be a tough process to go through, but that is something that I did want to mention. The remaining certifications that are required are pretty straightforward. That is the only one that I think was kind of more of a question in the minds of a lot of people. All right, so now let's assume that you have the SBA loan. So now what do you do with it, and how long do you have to do something with it? Well, originally it came out that you had 8 weeks to utilize those funds. And so you could use those for payroll costs and then also non-payroll costs. Well, now they've come out and said you actually have 24 weeks, which made it much, much easier for many users of the PPP program. And you can use it, as I mentioned again, for payroll costs and some non-payroll costs that they've specifically stated. So to begin with, the way that the guidance is now, so I'm not going to go back and tell you what it was before and confuse the issue, but the way that it is now, you have to use at least 60% of your PPP funds for payroll costs. The remaining 40 can be used for other eligible costs, which include rent, and that can be on real or personal property, mortgage interest payments, utilities, which is electricity, gas, water, internet, phone. They've even come out further and said that it can include fuel when you're driving a business vehicle. And then also, you'll cover healthcare benefits and employee retirement contributions. Now that's more part of the payroll costs, but 60% payroll, 40% non. And so that's really the main thing to kind of keep in your mind. And really that opened it up a lot once they said that 24 weeks were allowable, because most people that we're seeing can utilize the funds almost 100% or a much higher percentage during a 24-week pay period, where it may have been a little more challenging if you had just 8 weeks. But we're seeing a lot more flexibility with this, and I think that was a huge benefit to the borrowers. And so once you've kind of allocated your costs and looked through, your personal budget for your business and decided how you're going to use these PPP funds, then you're thinking, okay, how do I best use these? What do these definitions mean that I'm reading in this guidance? And a few things that we got a lot of questions on that I think are just good things to kind of arm yourself with as you're going towards forgiveness. So one, we talked about the 60-40 split. Two, you see a lot of wording about eligible expenses and payroll costs incurred and or disbursed. And so you want to make sure that you kind of know what that means. So it's kind of easy to think through the dispersed piece. If you wrote your check, if you did a draft or an ACH, those funds came out during your covered period. Obviously, that's included. But what does it mean when they say costs incurred? So let's say, for instance, that you have a payroll and maybe your covered period ends, let's just say your covered period ends today. Well, maybe your payroll ends today also, but you don't pay them until Friday. Well, you can still include the payroll that was incurred by your employees working, even though you don't pay them until the next pay period. And it works very similar to your eligible expenses. And so if you have an electric bill that is for June, which was in your covered pay period, but you didn't pay it until after your covered period ended, you actually can include that. So you just want to make sure that you're aware of kind of how those expenses are defined with respect to the covered period being incurred and paid. And then another question that a lot of people have asked, can I use prepaid costs? Can I pay my rent ahead? Well, the answer to that is really no. So they're really trying to enforce that. We're looking at the paid and or incurred, but you can't prepay bills and get them into this period just for the forgiveness piece and including it as an eligible non-payroll costs. One last thing that I want to mention to you is that there's been a lot of discussion about, okay, if I use these PPP funds to cover eligible costs, do I get to deduct them still for tax purposes? Well, the IRS came out on April 30th, and they stated that no deduction is allowed for an expense that is otherwise deductible if the payment of the expense results in forgiveness of a PPP loan. So the IRS way of saying that is no. So if you use your PPP funds to cover payroll or to cover some of these eligible non-payroll costs, you don't get to deduct that for tax purposes. Now, I've sat in on a lot of webinars and conference calls, and I'm sure Michael has too, and we're hearing that that was not Congress's intention, and we're hearing directly from the congressman that was not their intention, and our local and regional state leaders. And so we're hoping that they will come back out, and it will have to happen in the next 2 or 3 weeks before they leave, and clarify that and give us additional guidance that just receiving the PPP funds is not negating the ability of the borrower to deduct those expenses, because that's a huge, that's a huge factor for a lot of businesses when you're planning for tax liabilities, when you're planning for cash flow needs. So hopefully we'll get some additional guidance on that. That is something that continues to be a lingering issue. One final thing, and then I'm going to turn it over to Michael. As I mentioned earlier, we talked about kind of the percentage of PPP loans and how small businesses really do make up a large percentage of that. And so, as I mentioned, 4.2 million of the loans were under 150,000, so 85% of the total number of loans. Well, there is a lot of movement and a lot of lobbying by our banks, by the AICPA, by a lot of groups in Washington that are really pushing for some type of movement where any loans that are less than $150,000 are automatically forgiven. And we even heard 350 for a while. So I'm hoping 150 at least. But as we're moving into the time when it's getting to a necessity of providing the forgiveness application to your bank, keep your eye out. Let's look at it, because maybe something will be coming down the pike from Congress and give us some additional guidance where they can forgive a lot of these loans automatically, which is good for our borrowers, good for our clients, good for the SBA, who's already super overwhelmed, and for our lenders as well. So that's a huge undertaking. But so keep your eyes and ears open for that. However, if it doesn't come down the pike, then we are going to be looking at forgiveness application. And so I'm going to turn it over to Michael at this point to give you the high points of that.
Thanks, Jennifer, for all the good information. One thing I want to piggyback on what you said previously was that any of this information is based on the way it looks right now to us. There's been multiple rounds of legislation and a whole lot of guidance from the SBA and Treasury regarding this program. And so, what we're talking about is as it exists right now. We even think that, as Jennifer said, that potentially there will be some sort of blanket forgiveness on loans under a certain amount. And certainly there's a lot of groups that are pushing for that. There's a lot of talk on the Hill about that. And Secretary Mnuchin actually signaled that he would be open to that recently. So there's also another round of stimulus that is in negotiation right now in Congress. And so something, I would expect that there would be something modifying this program to come out of that legislation. Don't know what that modification would be, but I'm sure it won't remain untouched. So I'm going to try and keep this pretty quick, but I'm going to talk through the timing of forgiveness, talk a little bit about the forgiveness forms, and then what is required to be submitted as documentation, including in the forgiveness forms, and then give you maybe a tip that might help simplify your forgiveness application. So first of all, people go, what's the deadline for filing for forgiveness? Well, there kind of is no deadline. I would imagine that most people would want to file their forgiveness before they have to start repaying the loan. And so the last round of legislation changed the timing for repaying the loan. So now you have your covered period, which originally was 8 weeks and now is up to 24 weeks. Your repayment begins 10 months after the end of your covered period. So right now, basically, you can elect the 8-week period, or you can elect the 24-week period, and you can actually elect any amount of time between those. So you don't have to wait to the end of the 24 weeks to apply for forgiveness. And then once you have the end of your covered period, you add 10 months to that, that's when you would have to start paying the loan. There's one additional weird thing about that is that if you've submitted an application for forgiveness and the SBA has not remitted the forgiveness amount to the bank, your payment period doesn't begin until the bank actually gets funding from the SBA for your forgiveness portion. That's something they also baked into the last round of legislation. So we do have a lot of time to do these forgiveness applications, relatively speaking. So let's talk about the two different forms and why you might use one or the other. The form is called is 3508. You can download it on the Treasury's website. It's pretty easy, treasury.gov. There's a link there from the front page to all the PPP program documentation. If you're a do-it-yourselfer kind of person, there's a whole lot of information there. So if you want to experience some pain, you can go through all that information. The 3508, there's the full form, and then there's the EZ form. Obviously, everybody's gonna go, well, I wanna file the EZ form. And there's kind of three scenarios where you can file the EZ form. So if you are self-employed, filing your taxes on a Schedule C and you don't have any employees, you can use the EZ form. And that's really your most simple situation. You attach your 2019 Schedule C, fill in a number, and send it in. That's as easy as it gets. Unfortunately, the rest of them aren't nearly that easy. The second scenario is if you don't have any reduction of any individual employees' wage rate or salary of more than 25% for your covered period compared to January 1 through March 31st of 2020, and you don't have any reduction in your full-time equivalent employees from January 1, 2020 through the end of the covered period, then you can use the EZ form. So basically that means that if you maintained the size of your workforce and you didn't cut anybody's pay. Now there are exceptions to all of those rules, and I don't have time to get into all those right now, but you know, firings for cause count. If you're unable to rehire people for whatever reason, you give them bona fide offers and they reject that, you know, you get exemptions for those kind of things. If somebody requests leave or has COVID leave, those all things relate to exceptions there that can keep you from disqualifying based on the FTE basis. And then the third scenario where you can use the EZ form is if you have to meet the no reduction of any individual's wage rate or salary of more than 25%, like the prior scenario, but also you were unable to operate your business at full capacity by being in compliance with a governmental agency that required you basically to not open. So there's a time where restaurants are currently still operating at reduced capacity, or a bar was actually shut down as a result of governmental guidance. That allows you to use the EZ form. That basically gets you out of that FTE calculation. So the form, the EZ form, it actually looks fairly simple because it's kind of a one-pager, and you walk down the amount of your payroll, the amount of your non-payroll expenses, that 60% calculation, and your amount of forgiveness. Well, that's true. It's one page and the form is fairly simple, but there's a substantial amount of documentation that you have to provide in addition to that. So I'm going to walk through the documentation that is required to be provided with the EZ form. You have to have documentation verifying your cash compensation and your non-cash benefit payments, which include bank statements or third-party payroll reports. I mean, most people, if you're outsourcing your payroll, that's going to be your good source there, where if you're using, you know, my firm or Jennifer's firm or ADP or Gusto or something like that, you ought to be able to get reports that will have that information in order that you can attach there, so you don't have to attach bank statements supporting it. You have to include your payroll tax filings, your 941s, or equivalent reports from your payroll service provider. You have to provide receipts, canceled checks, or account statements showing the contributions to health insurance or retirement plans. And you have to show the calculation, or you have to show your average number of FTE, full-time equivalent employees at January 1st. So then documentations verifying non-payroll expenses would be for mortgage interest payments, your amortization schedule and receipts or canceled checks, or lender account statements. For rent or lease, you have to actually include a copy of your lease agreement and receipts or canceled checks, or a lessor account statement. And for utility payments, you have to provide your invoices for the period prior to the application from February 2020 to confirm that that service existed, and then also those paid during the covered period, and receipts and canceled checks or account statements verifying the payments. So when you add all that up, if you're getting forgiveness for all those different types of expenses, you might be filing the EZ form, but you also might have 1,000 pages of documentation behind it. So it's not quite as simple as it might appear on first glance. There's additional documentation if you're using the EZ form that you have to maintain in your file, but don't submit it. And that includes the employee level detail information to support the certification that your wage and salary limitation was not violated, basically, that you didn't reduce anybody's wage or salary more than 25%. And then you have to provide documentation or maintain documentation of any of those exceptions that we talked about to the FTE calculation regarding firings for cause, voluntary resignations, requests for time off, a reduction in work schedule, or inability to hire similarly qualified employees for unbilled positions. And then also documentation, if you meet that where you were required to shut down or reduce capacity, supporting that certification that you were unable to operate, including copies of the requirements and your financial records. So that's the EZ form. The full form has additional schedules regarding the calculation of the FTE, full-time equivalent employee, and wage and salary limitations. And then you also have to provide documentation of the FTE calculation on a per week basis. And then you have to maintain but not submit additional documentation supporting, it goes down to the employee level by pay period detail that you have to keep in your file regarding that salary and wage reduction calculation. And then documentation supporting the listing of highly compensated individuals, and documentation regarding the exceptions to the FTE and wage reduction calculations. So in short, the applications may appear simple on the face of it, but there's a whole lot of information that's required to be submitted with them. And one tip that I'll give you to hopefully simplify your forgiveness application is that you may look at your 8-week period and say, I spent 75% of my money on payroll and 25% on overhead, like the original rules were, rent and utilities. That's what I use this money for. And I can qualify for 100% of forgiveness. That's great. But to simplify the submission of your application, you might instead choose to take 10 weeks of payroll, counting for your forgiveness, and don't count any of the lease or rent payments that you made or the utility payments. That way you have to provide the supporting information for payroll, which you have to anyways, and then you don't have to dig out a copy of your lease and include it with your report in addition to canceled checks and statements and all that kind of stuff. So that's one of the things that you might think of as to how you might simplify and reduce the stack of papers that you have to provide to your bank, hopefully electronically. So that's something that we're thinking about. Again, if you're under like 150 threshold, I would wait and see what Congress does. If you're maybe even if you're under the 350 threshold, that's another number that's been tossed around. I expect 150 would be much more likely than 350, but we're just speculating here. But also, if under the 8-week period or whatever you are at now, if you're getting less than 100% forgiveness, wait, because time will cure some of this as you continue to spend payroll over 24 weeks, and you may be able to rehire some people and that type of thing. So that's what I got on the forgiveness period. I know that was a whole lot and real fast, but I'm going to toss it back to y'all, and we're happy to answer any questions y'all may have.
All right. Thank you to both Jennifer and Keith. I'm getting a little feedback there, so I apologize for that. It is a little bit after 1, and so I didn't see any questions in the feed there. And I think we will. I think we'll go ahead and just close the meeting out, so we'll be on time. But thank you both for taking the time to do that, and for the things that you've done for our community. And we appreciate you joining us here today.
Thank you so much. Great to see you guys.
Yeah, thank you. And Tyler, then the last thing we'll do as Rotarians, we say the 4-way test. And so, is it the truth? You'll just say along with me to yourself, but I'll say this. Is it the truth Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? So with that, we really do appreciate everyone joining us today and for your patience. We would appreciate any comments and suggestions that you have for improving this experience. We do have another meeting planned for you. We're very pleased. The program committee has been able to arrange your next program. And so you look in the coming weeks, we have a great speaker for you for a meeting that we'll be having in August. And with that, Rotary is adjourned. So thanks everyone for joining us today for our first virtual meeting.